Is there a secret button in the laboratories of TikTok that boosts certain content creators?
So, yeah, I would say.
On today's episode, we have a really special treat. We have my good friend and colleague, Sam. I mean, aside from being one of the smartest people that I know, he's a social media exec who oversaw content strategy at TikTok during the early days when it was just moving from Musical.ly into the cultural behemoth that it is today. Not only is he a media executive, he's also a lawyer. So I knew that with all the controversy and mystery surrounding everything from shadow banning.
We just released 2 videos. One has 2 million views and the other one has 200. Is shadow banning a real thing?
Yeah, it's a great question.
How the algorithm works.
People think they go in and say, this person's video is gonna get 1 million views. Actually, what it does.
Or even the constitutionality of whether or not, they have to be sold or should be sold or whether they should exist.
I know you went to Harvard and studied law, but you also worked at TikTok.
Yeah.
What do you think about the TikTok ban?
I knew that he would be the best person to talk to. Today's episode is one that you're not going to miss.
So Samsung recently just announced that they're gonna push into a 6-day work week. Because the economy's been in the shitter recently. So they're like, yo, in order for us to recover all the losses, we need people to work harder.
Right.
So they're actually pushing for a 6-day work week. Isn't that crazy?
It's so wild to me too. Like,
while Bernie Sanders is out here is like, yo, we gotta have a 4-day work week.
Right.
Well, I think it's interesting for Korea because Korea usually had a 6-day work week and then they pushed to a 5-day work week.
Right.
And then I think 5 years ago or 6 years ago.
No, it was a while ago. It was a while ago.
No.
Pushed it back.
What I was saying was they pushed it back maybe, I don't know, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, let's say. But I think 5 years ago, what was interesting was they were finding that Koreans were still working so much that they would do things like shut the lights off, right?
Right.
So to literally force you to go home.
Go home, yeah.
And now they're coming back and they're saying, no, fuck that. We're going to go back.
It's the pendulum swing, man.
Yeah.
There's too many Gen Z Koreans were like, yo, work-life balance.
Well,
and they were like, nope.
I mean, not just Koreans. It's like Gen Z. Like, Gen Z is richer than millennials were at their age, richer than boomers were at their age. Like, I think, obviously, Gen Z has like a political consciousness that's very good, and they are correct about, growing inequality and, imbalances in terms of equity between labor and capital, but also empirically are doing very, very well relative to like younger generations at similar points in the past. And so that warps you too, where it's like everybody I know is making in a major city is making, $70K plus, and we've got lots of leisure time. And that's just what you come to expect, which is good. They should expect that. That's what we should all have. But it's interesting how different the mindset is.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of mindsets, let's get into the mindset of Sam.
What a transition.
You know what I mean? Let's get into the mindset of Sam. Like, let's first talk about who you are.
Yeah.
Because I think our audience have no idea. It's like, I didn't see this
You don't
dude
think my
on,
mom's listening?
we
got one.
So mom knows, but they definitely haven't seen you on the FYP.
That's facts.
Yet you have had a significant impact on who does get on the FYP. So let's just get into it, bro.
Yeah.
Like, who are you, man?
Yeah, well, first, and apologies to the listeners for going from Jose Andres to me. What a precipitous fall in interest. Yeah, I'll say one thing. In terms of getting on the FYP, for my expert opinion, it's like have more famous guests on. So you guys can take a note back on that one. But yeah, man, I've been working at social media platforms for the last 5 or 6 years. Most recently at Snapchat, where I oversaw Spotlight, all the content operation stuff. So our community team, programming strategy, as well as product. So building tools for creators, ranking and personalization, the algorithm itself, as people would talk about it, growth, all that sort of stuff, the video UX. And prior to that was at TikTok, where I ran the content strategy team and then briefly the programming team as well. And yeah, it's been a ride, man. Like seeing social video go from something that felt like it was in the decline at the beginning of my time at TikTok. Facebook's pivot to video and the sort of much ballyhooed growth and then contraction in social video, especially among publishers, to essentially during the pandemic, TikTok completely eating the rest of media. And if you look at the comps now, social video, as you guys know, is the dominant form of free speech, of information transmission, of entertainment that exists in the world today. Like, I think one of my favorite stats is that the YouTube TV app so people watching YouTube videos on their connected TVs is 50% bigger than Netflix on any given day, just from the TV app.
Wow.
And on many days, bigger than all streaming combined. So, the distinctions between what's UGC and what's short form and the rest of entertainment are sort of blurring together, as you guys can attest to, but also it's everything. And so it was interesting to be at this moment where short form social video was basically lip sync and dance contest content, and then seeing it grow to what it is today and being along for the ride.
So when you first joined TikTok,
yeah,
what was the state of the company then, and what is the state of the company now?
Yeah. So when I first joined TikTok, I had been working at like a social video or a digital publisher rather. So a company called Group 9 Media that has owned and operated websites, Pop Sugar, Thrillist, things like that.
That's where you guys met.
That's right. Yeah. And then also was doing, there was a studios business, producing more long form stuff, branded and unbranded. They were doing sponsored content for marketing and whatnot as well. So pretty diversified, but also quite small. And I was really sort of looking to knock on doors and get my foot in the door in traditional media, which was tough. They look for particular profiles, particular backgrounds. There really is like a well-worn track. If you want to be, VP of development at IFC, you start as a coordinator and you sort of wait for your mobility and you wait for yourself to move up. And I didn't have that. So, what I found was that there was a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more opportunity in the digital space. And in particular, talking to friends of mine that had been at Musical.ly, that had just rebranded to TikTok, they were like, the numbers are nuts. Like, this is really working and this is going to be a good place to work. So when I hopped over, it was still very much coming out of that Musical.ly era where, it wasn't Jacob Sartorius being the biggest creator, but it was very much Charlie, where it was still sort of the basic dances and the trends. And, not most, but a very significant proportion of TikTok users were posting video to the platform every day. So if you think about what percentage of people do you think post a video on a given day to TikTok, it's vanishingly small, right? TikTok is able to sustain itself because it has millions of pretty good videos that it can show to everybody, not because it has, hundreds of millions of people posting those videos. But at the time, it was sort of reversed. It was people using the lip sync tools, people using the creative tools to make content largely for their friends. And that was reflected in the feed. So about 70% of the content when I started was either lip syncing or dance, and largely trend-based.
And what year was this?
This was end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And the company's mission at that point was just grow, acquire users, grow time spent, especially for people over 18 and then over 21, over 25.
Because it was significantly a younger user base at the time.
Skewed very young and very female. So actually, that first audience, that sort of core teen dance female high school audience, great metrics, but what really allowed Musical.ly and then TikTok to break out of that was this sort of second audience of what we called sports meme gamer. So males sort of the same age that were going on Musical.ly sort of to laugh at their classmates, and in particular because PewDiePie did a segment where he would post Musical.ly TikTok cringe videos, and his audience, this was sort of peak PewDiePie, was coming on the platform to find cringe to send to him. And then, the product is so good, the algorithm is so good that those people stayed and they started making content for one another, in particular about sports and memes and video games. And that's really, I think, a fundamental truth about how platforms grow is they don't grow in this sort of like unified front where they're gathering everybody. They grab individual audiences. Right. So as opposed to saying like, we want to grow our platform by adding people who like memes, it's people that like memes also like sports and also like video games. So we need to have all of those so that we can get that individual person. Wow. So programming at the sort of human level as opposed to the categorical level. So we got that second cluster, sports meme gamer. And really the mission when I joined was 70% of the feed is lip sync and dance. The audience is heavily female. How do we diversify it? And that's literally what it was called, content diversity. How do we make the percentage of views that go to lip sync and dance go down? And it was a huge ranking effort, a huge operational effort, literally just acquiring quite a lot of content in other categories, and then running from there. The strategic gloss on that was figuring out what the positioning of TikTok should be vis-a-vis other platforms, what it actually was. We knew that the ranking worked because it had been imported largely from China, from Douyin. But what we didn't know was like, what was the market opportunity? And that's what we had to figure out.
So when the pandemic hit and everybody had to essentially resort to looking at their phones 18 hours a day, it was almost like a blessing in disguise for TikTok, right?
Not in disguise. It was an out and out blessing. Yes, for sure. Because, musically, I think was known, TikTok was known, and we had millions of people who had downloaded the app, looked at it and been like, I don't know what this is, right? And then left. But when you're sitting on your couch and you have nothing else to do, you're gonna start to experiment. Also, we started to have you have Charlie D'Amelio on Fallon or whatever, like it starts to hit normie discourse a little bit. And so people were willing to give a second shake because they had a lot of time. They were just consuming a lot of content. I always think it's funny when like the Quibi folks were like, well, it failed because of the pandemic because people weren't commuting or whatever. It's like, that doesn't make any sense.
Shots.
Yeah. And first of all, I do want to give Quibi credit for the quality of the content. I'm the only person on earth who's watched every single thing Quibi ever released because when we were at TikTok,
so you have a right to be hostile.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because when I was at TikTok, we did a little diligence on if we should acquire the library after they were shutting the service down, and ultimately Roku did. But I went through and I watched it all, and there's actually some good stuff in there. I'll give a shout out to one show in the library, which was set up like Chopped, like a competition show, except it was for professional cleaners. And so they would have 3 identical dirty kitchens.
Sponsored by Handy. What a great tie-in.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Honestly, somebody should bring this format back. I don't know who owns it, but it was extraordinarily satisfying. Watching these people make these kitchens immaculate, and then the judges taking swabs or whatever at the end.
That was a huge vertical on TikTok.
For sure.
Yeah, cleaning content.
For sure.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, still the car detailers, power washing, lawn edging, all that sort of stuff.
Can I ask you a silly question as someone that hasn't watched any Quibi show?
Yeah.
So when you acquire the content, is it all vertical on the
Yeah. So this is what was tough was that part of Quibi's pitch was that they had tech so that if your phone was horizontal, it would present it horizontally, sort of cinematically. And then if you flipped it vertical, it would give you basically a different angle optimized for vertical. So they filmed all shows both ways. And that was tough for us because we're I don't know what we do with this whole second presentation of it.
Yeah.
And then for Roku, they didn't know what to do with the vertical presentation.
Yeah.
But yes, that was the best show I saw. No hate on Quibi. They returned a lot of investor capital. Honestly, if you're I'm going to build a company to compete with Netflix, if you said that to me today, I would say you're going to need $100 billion, and they tried to do it with $1 billion. So I respect the effort at the very least.
So I think what might be eye-opening for a lot of folks out there is you're dropping so many gems in terms of how TikTok grew from musically highly female music, dance generated to, organically grow into this sports game meme, sort of male culture. But I think the other thing that, people might take away is the fact that very deliberately from there, you guys probably had verticals where you were trying to diversify very strategically into, right?
For sure.
So I remember when we used to talk, food was a huge thing.
Of course.
Your team would reach out to the Gordon Ramsays of the world to say, hey, you know what? We want to get into cooking. Hey, you know what? We want to get into travel. Hey, you know what? We want to get into corporate, whatever it might be with the XL woman, right? So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, for sure. So they were basically what you just referenced would probably break down into 2 operational tracks. One would be, really courting creators that are going to give legitimacy to the platform, right? Because people are naturally skeptical. They're I already have a bunch of social media, and I'll touch on that piece too, but I already have a bunch of things where I watch content. I'm not really in need of another one. Also, perhaps I'm suspicious. It's got a weird name, it's Chinese owned. Is this really something that I need to add to my life? And as people were giving TikTok, maybe their second or third try during the pandemic, it was important for us as an organization to have the content front loaded that would show them that like there are people here participating and people that you sort of know and recognize and trust. And so, that meant doing deals with the NBA and the NFL. And it also meant working with a Gordon Ramsay or a Kevin Hart or
Justin
whomever.
Bieber. I remember you did that one.
Justin Bieber as
Rock.
well. The Rock,
yeah.
for sure. All those people, what we found is that if we were to put recognizable faces at the beginning, like in your new user experience, that was going to be good for retention because like I said, it legitimizes the app. You see people that you recognize, you feel a little bit, your discomfort might sort of melt away to some extent. But then we find over time that there's some right amount of celebrity in the feed that's much lower than that. So people will interact with known entities quite a bit at the beginning of their time, and then they'll figure out who they actually like and which creators resonate with them or subcultures or trends or communities, and they'll start to construct their own FYP. And some percentage of that might be celebrities that they're interested in. But at the beginning, that was really important. And then in terms of particular verticals, food, fitness, travel, sports, all of those things. But the nature of TikTok is like, if you get any given video, people are only going to be watching at that time for a minute or less. And so you need huge volumes of that content. So a lot of the work that was done was going to publishers, going to creators, going to sort of random rights holders and acquiring these big libraries of short form content that we could use. And the nice thing about UGC is that people then replicate it. If you're acquiring content, it's succeeding, people start to make it on their own and you don't have to acquire it anymore. And so that's always the attempt is like, can we kickstart some sort of little ecosystem in each one of these verticals? And we knocked them off one by one, basically.
And what's the budget? How do you allocate and decide what budget is for each vertical?
Yeah, great question. So, I'm not going to give out any sort of trade secrets here, but I'll just say in the abstract, there's different ways that you can measure the importance of content. And so there's proxies, right? Like you can see, are people commenting? Are people favoriting these videos? Are people saving these videos? You have access to all that data. So you can look at like which pieces of content have the highest engagement rates relative to the amount of supply that we have. Now, if you're designing a perfect system to measure the value of content, what you would want to do is have one group of people that have that content and an identical group of people that don't. So remove the content for a certain group of people and then say, do they watch less content? Do they come back less frequently? And you can actually measure those differences. And if you're a platform that has dollar figures for the value of a user or the value of a user per day or the value of an hour watched, you can then impute money against how much lost engagement you have from removing that content. Or even just measure the amount of engagement that's lost itself. And then you can look at a bunch of different meta characteristics. What type of creator? What are they talking about? What hashtags do they use? What category of content? And you can say like, news content versus sports versus fitness. How incremental is each type of content based on the experimental results? Now, there's huge caveats here. You can't build a perfect experimental system. You need a ton of engagement for that to work already. But in theory, that's sort of the best way to construct demand measurement is by ablating certain types of content and seeing what happens.
So for people that don't know, like I think one of the concepts that you're describing is ARPU, right? Basically, revenue per user. What is the current revenue per user?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, ARPU is like, it's huge and it's thorny and it's something that all of these platforms are dealing with right now. And, I'll actually...
Why is it thorny?
Well, because you can make changes that are good for engagement or that your users want, but that makes the revenue per user go down. So I'll give a discrete example. So one reason there were sort of growing pains around Instagram switching from largely feed-based and story-based to largely video-based is because of ARPU. And to their infinite credit, they just sort of committed and pushed through it, knowing that there were going to be these ARPU challenges and having faith that they could raise the ARPU up after they went through them. But essentially, if you're looking at a story, if your friend posts a picture of their kid and then you swipe past that to Gigi Hadid's story, there's an ad. And maybe, there's 4 pictures in her story, then you swipe, there's another ad. So you can really ratchet up the ad load in that format. Likewise in the feed, it's a full sort of rich presentation of an ad. There's lots of ways for you to interact and for you to touch it, as opposed to a sort of infinite scrolling vertical video feed where the ads are placed there, but people might consider them less. They might scroll past them more quickly. Maybe they're spending more time on an individual video itself, so you can show them fewer ads in a session. All of those things are going to go into how much revenue you're getting from that user. users themselves also have different value, right? If you're a kid who's living at home that doesn't have spending money, you're not going to generate as much advertising revenue because advertisers aren't going to pay a premium to sell ads that you see, as opposed to, if you're a 30-something coastal white collar male, that's gonna change the revenue that's associated with you. You guys obviously will experience that as creators, where certain verticals are a lot more lucrative than others. Where if you're reviewing, I don't know, like
iPhones.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Like the CPMs are going to be really, really high. If you're a golf creator, the CPMs, that which is basically the rate that the platform can sell an ad against your content at, are going to be really, really high. And it's not marginal. It's not like 10% or 20% higher. It could be 10, 15, 25%. 20 times higher.
Yeah. X, 20. Yeah, exactly. YouTube's average CPM in 2014 was $2, right? But then the same average across tech creators that are doing unboxings, literally 20x,
right?
$25, right?
Yeah.
So it's substantial, and it goes the other way too. If someone's watching,
wait,
Cocomelon,
$2 versus $25?
Yeah, yes. Absolutely, because the intent is completely different.
Yeah. And I get this question all the time about specific creators, where people will say, she only has 750,000 followers, but Forbes says she made $9 million last year, and it's like, yeah, if you have 750,000 followers, but they're all investment bankers in their 30s, that's worth more than 10 million who are watching you,
for your dance
do
videos.
Dances. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's why when we look at these things, it's like personal finance. Yeah, a bounty on an affiliate deal for a credit card sign up is $500.
Right. For a mattress, $300. Yeah.
Yeah. For a mattress, yeah, it's huge, right? But if you're selling, a pair of socks, that might be $2.
What is the bounty on a skewer? Like a meat skewer.
Let's find out.
Let's find
Go to Honey. Yeah.
The other question that I have that's very inside baseball is, in a lot of that playbook, it's not new, right? It's not new. I think being able to understand that we got to go from a great platform and then essentially make that platform into a thriving community, and we could invest in creating that community. That's not a new concept. I certainly saw that firsthand at YouTube, right?
Yeah.
YouTube was like cat videos and like going to the zoo, and it was very much that. But then in 2010, 2009, 2010, they made a very conscious effort to say, hey, we have to graduate this platform from UGC to make it feel more premium and more premium, so that specifically we could get ad dollars, right? So what they did was they allocated $200 million into the premium program, right? And then they went across all the verticals.
Yeah.
And they said, let's give Tony Hawk, Russell Simmons, Food Network, we'll elect this, and the NBC. We'll give all these folks money to essentially make premium content on it. So my question to you is, when did that start at TikTok?
Yeah.
And how big was that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I think it's probably arguable. And what's so tough about operating these platforms is that, there's no way of knowing whether that was $200 million well spent or not. I'm sure you could argue that, giving Tony Hawk money and, these professional comedians or whatever money was good because it provided this vanguard, and you can see premium content on YouTube. Other people replicate it. We get more supply. You could also argue that just by nature of rev share and the amount of demand that YouTube has, that competition is going to create this sort of drift to sophistication, where the content is going to get more and more premium over time by virtue of the competition, by virtue of you having to make videos that are a little bit better than somebody else to get their views. On TikTok, it was certainly a mix of both, where, I think one thing was rolling out longer videos, which are a bit harder to make. So you have a smaller pool of creators that are capable of making them. The second was sort of a strategic element where, we always wanted to make sure that it was easy to post the platform, that we had the best creative tools. Obviously, CapCut is a huge part of that I wasn't involved in, but is a really big input into the supply. But also, you can say that we want 20% of people posting a video every day, or you can say we want 1% of people posting a video every day. That's a strategic decision. And so if you're okay with it being, if you want it to be 20%, then you can't push towards sophistication because 20% of your users can't make it. If you're okay with that number being 3 or 4 or 5%, then you're going to see this drift towards sophistication as well, because you've deprioritized mass posting. So longer videos, the strategic decision about how participatory you want the platform to be. And then there's also sort of general operational programs. We certainly did this at TikTok. It's ongoing of sort of courting those who are able to make things that are a little bit glossier. That's what you're describing with the YouTube.
Well, and that's what you described in how you tried to get cultural sort of touchstones and make the platform feel a little bit more familiar and credible.
For sure. Although I do think that something where TikTok had a lot of success was we're getting Dame Judi Dench, but she's just dancing with her grandkid, right? Mm-hmm. So it isn't her delivering a Shakespearean sonnet, it's her doing TikTok.
And that's such a really good distinction, because one of the things that I think TikTok did well that YouTube did not in that same sort of acquisition investment period was try to essentially carpet bag or evangelize in a way where, you know, YouTube's premium content was basically stuff that didn't work on the Food Network, that wasn't quite as good, being dumped on YouTube, right?
Right.
TikTok didn't do that. They didn't have Judy. They didn't just use it as a distribution platform. Yeah. They said, hey, you have to have the fluency of platform to actually create on that platform.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very key distinction. Because,
and I think, you know, one thing that's been interesting for me to watch, I think that like the competitive elements and people competing for the financial rewards, the followership, the clout is so powerful. It's really hard to push back against that and say, oh, actually, we want to go a little bit more true UGC. We want to be a little bit more accessible. You know, I think we had some good success doing that at Snapchat. That certainly was a priority for us, was making the platform approachable for new creators or normal Snapchatters. But I think that you can also see a counterpoint in YouTube Shorts, where ostensibly, this is a short form video product that should make posting to YouTube more accessible. After we've had years of the partner program, we've seen YouTubers become essentially like these media companies and publishers. They're posting longer form content with ad breaks. You know, a lot of YouTubers will take 3 or 4 months to put out a video because of the level of sophistication that goes into it. And so YouTube says, okay, we have shorts now. We're going to compete to get some of the demand for short form video, but also like ostensibly, this is an easier entry point for creators. And I think what we've seen on YouTube Shorts is actually the opposite, that shorts are really hard to make. They tend to be from those creators, but you have to be exactly a minute to get distribution on YouTube Shorts. There has to be a perfect loop at the end. The editing has to be really, really tight. Perhaps that's because of the YouTube audience, what people expect from sessions while they're viewing YouTube. But I think essentially they've just added an additional quite difficult task as opposed to adding that sort of lower entry point. Now, there are things that they could do about that from the ranking and from the product side that perhaps they're doing, but certainly that doesn't seem to be what.
That's why the shorts are suffering.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the program overall is getting better and it is growing, right? But I mean,
it's growing in engagement, right?
Yes.
Which is
Yes.
orthogonal to whether it's growing in terms of supply.
Definitely not. Yeah, I totally agree. However, I think there's other factors that are not even academic that you don't like, that we don't think about. In that, you know, I interact with like young kids. I have 3 young boys. Literally, young kids, they're not allowed to have TikTok and they don't have Instagram.
Yes,
but they do have YouTube.
Yes.
So literally, they're watching all the short videos that most kids are watching on TikTok. They're watching it on YouTube.
100%, and that's like that was Reels bread and butter for years. Was like, do you not want to download TikTok because you think it's going to take over your life? Here's a little bit worse version of it. It's probably good enough for your needs. So here, we'll show you. It was stuff that was popular 2 weeks ago, but you don't really care. You have a kid or whatever. And that there's real value in that, actually. Like there's real value
that's
in
what I'm saying.
the preferred generic. And now there's some differentiation.
But that's a counter. That's like counterintuitive to like things that make sense when you take into account like market conditions,
for sure,
product superiority, any of these things. That's like, it doesn't actually, none of that matters because they're just not allowed to have it.
Right.
Or actually,
but that's a market condition.
That is a market condition.
So like if you were ex ante doing the analysis around Reels, you could say like, oh, we want it to be totally different. Or you could have been like, we think there's enough demand for people that just don't want to have TikTok for us to make it for a little bit.
Well, I'll give you an example of a counterintuitive market, I guess, condition. You just did a speech at you just did a talk at Parsons.
Yeah.
Tell them about that.
So the way that it was described to me, and I'm definitely paraphrasing, is TikTok is like cigarettes, like chain smoking cigarettes. Reels is like vape. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
YouTube Shorts is like Nicorette. It's like I'm trying to get off social media.
Yeah.
I still need a little bit of a hit,
Yeah.
but this is like how I'm gonna get off social media because it's so bad. It just gives me that slight nicotine boost, but not enough.
Right. And all three of those, there's demand for all of those.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this is in terms of being counterintuitive, when I left TikTok, I went over to Snapchat to run Spotlight, which had launched a couple months before. And my intuition was, TikTok is such a good product. The personalization is so precise. There's so much supply. It originates all this sort of culture and trends. And then we have Reels, which is sort of the preferred generic, where it's like, it's a bit worse, but good enough for my needs. This I'm talking about in 2021 at this point. So I came in and I was like, okay, so what we need to do with Spotlight is something basically different, like find a white space in the market and then try to be the best at that. Because even if we improve the personalization, it's not going to be as good as TikTok's. So we're not going to be able to grow because it's still the worst option if what you're looking for is the precision of algorithmic personalization, or if you're looking for the quantity of supply. So we have to have an offering that's competitive on some other axis. And we did make some investments in that, I think, pretty successfully around lower barrier to entry, getting people posting short form video for the first time, really taking advantage of the camera, and then also in particular sort of gearing the platform more towards conversations because people are on Snapchat to talk to their friends. So we need to be providing them things to share and things to talk about with their friends. However, what I vastly underestimated was how much growth there could be actually just from getting those commoditized elements right. So making those improvements to personalization, making those improvements to the creator tools, ingresses, basic sort of growth things. We saw really, really significant engagement growth just from improving those for the reasons that you're describing, where there's a lot of people there anyway. There's a lot of people that don't want to, start a 2-hour session on TikTok. And, we can provide an alternative and then a little bit of a better alternative and then a little bit of a better alternative. And there's a lot of growth that can come just from that.
I kind of want to circle back because I think this is a topic that, you guys are kind of going deep, like inside baseball. It's going to lose most people, just frankly. But I think one thing that everybody are curious about is there a secret button in the laboratories of TikTok that boost certain content creators?
Yeah. So, I would say generally it is not the case that like TikTok is choosing creators that it wants to succeed from a distribution perspective. I can say categorically that's not like the way that it operates. Certainly, and this is apparent from the outside, it's like TikTok wants people to know about cool things that are happening in the ecosystem, interesting creators, and will amplify them operationally. That might be putting them on the SiriusXM station, doing a live stream with them, putting out a list of creators that you should know or top creators in XYZ category. So certainly there's an element of endorsement there. It's not the case that they'll go and pluck a creator. I've heard this all the time where it was like, oh, TikTok wasn't minting, new digital superstars, so they created Alex Earl. That's not true. I talked to a lot of people at TikTok and I was explaining to them how she got so popular so quickly. It is the case that part of building a healthy ecosystem is meeting viewer demand and then creating demand in the things that you want. Like you see a path for growth where if TikTok had said we're the best music and dance platform, then they wouldn't be, the second biggest entertainment platform in the world today. They knew that they needed to create demand for fitness and for food and for travel and all those things where it didn't exist. And so, they may look at a certain characteristic of a video and say, we want those videos to do better than they otherwise would for some finite period of time to create that demand.
So there's a curation that goes into what gets pumped in the FYP. Not necessarily we like this creator, so we're just gonna boost this person, but there is a strategic move towards, since this is a category that we want to index into, we want to push content that resonates in this category. Is that more of what you're saying?
For sure. And that was actually, a lot of people don't remember this, but when Reels launched, there was a little tag on the videos that would be like featured. And it would actually say, this is a reel that Instagram is promoting because they want you to see more things like this. It's been publicly reported about TikTok that there's like a heating tool where, if they wanted to do food content to do better, then they could heat that content. But what the platforms might do is say, this content is really valuable. Make sure that enough people see it so we know if it's good or not.
Got you. So it's essentially a tournament.
Yeah.
Of getting to more users. So it first gets fed to 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And then if 1,000 out of the 1,000, maybe 100 likes it, and then it gets then fed to 10,000 more people. That you essentially just it's basically like an opposite pyramid that just shape shifts into a wider and wider audience.
That's a really, really good way to think of it. I think if you want to get even more precise, the way I think about the way a video gets distributed is like, think about a hill that's got like branches and little rocks and like undulations and whatever, and then like placing a marble at the top of the hill. And it might be the case that the marble just like rolls a couple inches and stops at a rock, but it's trying to get to the bottom. So it'll maybe go around that side and then around another branch and then find another pathway down. That's essentially how ranking a video works, is that video trying to find its way as far as it possibly can through this sort of maze, this twisty route. And what that looks like in more literal terms will be, okay, first showing it to some random people. Okay, we've noticed that people that are into cheap eats liked it. Okay, we'll roll it over into the cheap eats area. Okay, we've exhausted the cheap eats people, but we've noticed that among the cheap eats people that are into New York like it. Okay, there's a New York group. We'll show it to those New York people. Okay, of the people that are into New York, the people that are into social justice and labor activity like it. Okay, move it over into that group of people. Ultimately, the way a video gets a lot of distribution is by grabbing a lot of those audiences and aggregating them together. And then it becomes self-fulfilling because people also like to see videos that a lot of other people saw.
Right. And then the heat button is essentially carving out some of those branches.
It's like maybe if it stopped at one rock, it's like, go try this other rock.
Like, yo, let me push it this way a little bit.
Right.
Got you.
I think it's carving paths and clearing them. Potentially, right?
Potentially. But I think if you're carving paths, that kind of goes back into the conversation, is like, yo, you're basically just pushing it so that it could hit a certain number. Whereas I think what he's saying is, it's not necessarily carving paths, but yo, if it gets stuck at this rock, we're going to just push it one more time. Whereas, other videos would have just been stuck and just left it at that.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a real cost that comes to this from the platform's perspective as well, because they've built these machines to be efficient in generating whatever it is that they want to generate, shares or comments or view time. And so anything that you do to override that is inherently going to create a loss of the thing that the machine is optimized for, which comes at the expense of view time, but also money, right? So, if you're saying like, we really care about building a community around books, and so we're going to make sure that book videos get a fair shake, you're going to see less view time. So is it valuable enough for you to support that community versus the cost of the ads that you're giving up?
And the community that I think you guys specifically supported a lot were the cooking community.
For sure.
Yeah. During the pandemic, because that's how I first got my break.
Yeah.
Because this was a time when a lot of recipe videos started to proliferate on the app. So was that something that was intentional? Like, there are these intentional moments that the app says, okay, we need to index into these particular communities?
Yeah, it's a good question. There have definitely been times when, platforms operationally will pick a vertical that's that specific. Facebook had a big push into gaming or diverse live gaming. That's like one discrete vertical. During that pandemic era, it was really like anything other than lip sync and dance, we're trying to onboard and we're trying to support and we're trying to find an audience for. I would say like a good example of something that was like more discrete would be educational content. So things that were instructive or informative, that was a real push to acquire and promote and inspire that content because, we saw that it was better for retention and overall viewer well-being and lots of good stuff.
So you're a baseball guy. What inning are we in terms of TikTok's proliferation and short form video overall?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're sort of like at a local maximum. So maybe like this is the 7th inning stretch or something like that.
It's about to be a wrap. What's next?
And I mean that by, I think that we've gotten a little bit stale in terms of the formats and what we're seeing. And TikTok is actively trying to disrupt that, right? By saying like, you can post a 10-minute video. Let's see what happens. We're
who the fuck is doing that?
The way I talked about it when I worked there was like adding new entertainment modalities, different use cases. So, okay, you've got your short form video fix, but what about mid form? What about TV? What about a movie? What about something episodic? What about something serialized, right? All those things can be sort of be added on so that people have more reason to use that as a one-stop entertainment shop. But I think like on YouTube, we've seen, the beastification of YouTube where things tend to get edited in the same way and saturated in the same way and certain same energy. And then you see a little bit of like pushback against that where people like things that have a little bit more realness to them, a little bit less editing, a little bit more like, verisimilitude. And there's always these ebbs and flows. So I think like what we see in YouTube now is this sort of like this temporary plateau. And then I think that'll break down again where we'll see more true UGC. We'll see more, sort of weird micro trends. There's like a big deep talk trend going on this week of people that are just like, actually, I just want to see fucking weird shit on my FYP, just shake it up a little bit. And so I think the current form of TikTok is in sort of transition and then we'll settle out somewhere else. I think this also manifests itself in, if you watch the For You feed, it's pretty clear what TikTok's priorities are. And they state this as well, right? They care about live, they care about shopping, they care about longer videos. And so all of those things are sort of competing for consumer attention, AI creation and filters and lenses and things like that as well. And then some of those will win and some of those will lose. And then you'll have a different version of your FYP in a few months based on which things consumers reacted best to.
Would you say that TikTok is not the best platform? And this is obviously my opinion. Would you say that TikTok is not the best platform if you are a creator that wants to build community because the nature of the FYP doesn't allow your pre-existing followers to even see what these creators are up to because it's so randomized and it's so curated and it's so, if anything, it's the perfect platform for the user, but might not be the best platform for a creator that wants to build a community around it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I would say that it actually might be the best simply because there's more opportunity to break through initially. But you do see this where creators are like, I have this success on TikTok, I got to move them to Instagram. I got to move them to YouTube because I feel a little bit more secure in my distribution there. So one is that I still think TikTok has an advantage as the platform where you can go from literally nothing to very meaningful distribution just based on like if you have good stories or good takes or some talent, as opposed to like if you think about Instagram, if you think about Reels, they launch a short form video platform, but into an ecosystem with millions of pre-existing creators. So those creators are adapting to this new format, but they already have followers. And Instagram can't abandon those creators because they've built a huge industry around them, a huge sort of revenue generative function around them. As opposed to TikTok, where, it was sort of building all these creators from scratch. And still tends to do that. Obviously, it's calcified a little bit because it's been around for years and there are people with a lot of followers. But I still think generally it's a little easier to go from nothing. Now, once you have nothing, what you're talking about is like, what's the value of a subscriber on a per subscriber basis on these different platforms? I think we all sort of have some intuition around that. And obviously, brands have sort of moved away from that. And they're like, oh, well, we don't really care about followers per se. It's like how many comments, what's your engagement rate, right? Because they know that it's sort of a hard metric to interpret. But I think it is probably true that there's more value to a YouTube sub than an Instagram one than a TikTok one. Shorts has complicated this a little bit. But I wouldn't say that it's essential to TikTok's nature that that's true. It's a design decision by the platform, how much they are going to weight your relationship with creators in what they show you. So when you open up Reels, when you open up your FYP, it's using a ton of information it has about you and a ton of information that it has about those videos to decide what to show you. It's like, you like these categories and you've been watching a lot of this lately and this is trending. Also, you subscribe to these creators. And so it puts all of those into the ML model and then it'll show you some videos. Now, it's a decision to say, we really care about showing you content from the creators that you follow because we think that's good for creator retention and we want to reward creators with a consistent audience. Or you can say, we don't care as much, and what we care about more is showing you the optimal video to get you to watch longer. And the platforms can sort of decide where on that axis they want to be. And this is actually often an existential conversation between the platforms internally, because you have some teams that are goaled against engagement, and then you have creator teams that are goaled against how happy the creators are. And so that's an ongoing debate where they may say, right now creators aren't happy, we got to give a little bit more weight to subscriptions, or they might say creators love us right now, or engagement isn't doing well, we'll move away from that. So I think historically, it is true that TikTok and the For You feed has indexed much more to efficient outcomes for viewers than it has been consistent distribution for creators. But there's no reason that has to continue indefinitely.
Okay.
He's saying it's a conscious decision.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. It was a very political, diplomatic answer.
And this is the thing, is that I think, having worked at these platforms, I have immense empathy for the people that are working on all of these problems, because I know, like, if you're in a partnerships role and you're talking to these creators and they're like, why the hell are my views going down? Like, this is good. It's the same thing I've been posting. That's a really difficult conversation for them to have, because they may not know, or it may be because of these sort of bigger, larger things that are important to the platform. If you're, an ML engineer and you've been told, like, we have aggressive engagement goals, we have aggressive revenue goals, and then you're getting chirped because one particular creator is unhappy, it's like, well, you got to see the bigger picture here. And, none of them are wrong.
In terms of trends, what do you guys want to talk about? Is there anything that comes coming off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think one thing, and we've sort of covered this, but that this sort of like, drift to premium, drift to professionalization.
Yeah.
I think that's like a trend that I'm seeing on every platform. And then honestly, like, would be curious from y'all, like, what's the reaction to that, right? Like how do you balance between, like, we got to make our videos even tighter, even slicker in order to compete with other professional food creators that are coming to try to take our engagement, versus like everything becomes same.
So I think the drift to premium is very interesting for two reasons. Number one, there's definitely a race to the bottom in terms of making stuff better, cheaper, faster.
Yeah.
And that will only continue to proliferate with technology, because technology is deflationary, right?
Yeah.
So stuff's going to look better, it's going to be faster to make, and it'll be cheaper. And that's only going to accelerate. And you could fight that as much as you want, but that is a reality in this space.
Yeah.
So that's number one. The interesting thing is, I also think that, to your point of things being cyclical, there will be a pushback on that, where I think that people are going to eventually get to, I want more real, I want less polished, I want more imperfect. And that's where, like, when I ask you about macro trends and like what innings we're in, like, that's just human nature.
Yeah.
Like that's also going to happen. So as stuff becomes stale, and I look at a lot at like user behaviors. I think that people are so familiar with TikTok now that when they want to help something, they'll comment.
Yeah.
If they want to help something, they'll share, because they understand what that engagement actually does for someone's brand deal, what that engagement does for someone's subs. Like, they're savvy.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So now what's that next phase when we have premium, where it's going to be like, actually the premium thing might be, or the push towards premium might be a complete pushing away of premium.
Right. And, I think we saw this where, YouTube one was like vloggy, and then you had like memes, Numa guy, Star Wars kids, stuff like that. And then I think really the partner program is what kicked off that professionalization, both literally and aesthetically in the videos. But then you see the reaction to that is Vine. It's like, well, I can't make YouTube videos, but I can definitely make Vines. And I also like just like wacky shit, and I don't feel like I'm being served that on YouTube. And you sort of see this reaction, and that takes the form of a new platform. And then I think, sort of TikTok drafted off that in an effective way. So I think the natural cycle here would be like, and we saw this a little bit with what was the app where it gave you a notification and you post a picture once a day? Be Real with Be Real, right? Where it's like that Be Real, I think, is like a feature, but like a really good feature where it's like we're forcing you to be a little bit more authentic in what you post. And so typically you would see like another platform come in and take that, but the existing platforms have consolidated so much viewership and so much revenue. And I think creators are like, fuck that, I'm not going to do another platform. So there's a little bit of less of an opportunity for a new Vine to arise. But I'm curious, like, if somebody was like, oh, you got to get on be real, would you do it?
Yeah, I dabbled with it for like a week and I was like, fuck this shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because again, if you are a creator looking at it from a business standpoint, it's just like, yo, you can't plan that. You know what I mean? Just the nature of the app. That's why I feel like it's great for the user. It's great for the nature of what social media was initially intended to be. I think Be Real is genius.
Yeah.
But as a full-time content creator, I ain't got time for this shit.
Right. I think it's also like this sort of drift to professionalization or genericization of the platforms. I think it's in part because of that, where it's like, you guys, you got to post to YouTube and to Instagram and to TikTok. And it's like, we might make slight changes, but fundamentally it's like, you're not going to film a different restaurant for TikTok versus Instagram
100%.
versus YouTube.
You're just redistributing the same content in a different style, right? Like making various stylistic choices. Right. But yeah, like it's a bandwidth thing at the end of the day. Like that's why I feel like we haven't indexed into Threads or even X, even though we should be, because there's only so much that you could do, and that you need to allocate your resources and time to what you're good at.
I used to say this a lot. I think there's a misunderstanding both internally and externally from these platforms about what differentiation actually entails. And I think when you talk to somebody that's not sort of steeped in creator culture, internet culture, the feeds, and it's like, oh, we need to differentiate our platform from another, their intuition is like, you should be seeing different videos on our platform versus another. And then they're like, wait, why would we rank or promote or distribute this Righteous Eats video that's also on TikTok? But what differentiation really means, and I think as consumers understand it, it's not the 9 videos you see, it's the 10th video. So what's that 10th video that you only see on TikTok? What's that 10th video that you only see on Reels? Or that Reels recommends differently than TikTok does, that Spotlight recommends differently than Reels does. And that's how you have this sort of aesthetic experience of watching one feed versus another. And there's different ways for the feeds to establish that. One big way is creative tools, right? So you'll see these trends around a particular song or a particular lens, and it's like, oh, I'm on TikTok because everyone is doing XYZ AI wipe, right? And so it's like, okay, what do I get on TikTok? Oh, I get a little bit more of the AI creative tools content. What do I get a little bit more on Reels? Maybe I get a little bit more like real estate or something like that. And the rest of it's the same, but it's just that incremental video. And it's because like creators have to post the same thing everywhere, but so platforms have to distribute the same thing on each of them.
Yeah, but I think it's really up to the platform to understand a better way for curation. Because how much more do you want from a creator that is doing this? I mean, is the reason why it's called UGC is user generated, not user getting paid by the app to do this. You know what I mean? So if we're feeding your content wheelhouse, your farm, what can we get out of it? Do a better job at curation than asking us to come up with new content for each of your platforms. Right. And if you also look at it from the perspective of the user, we have people, so depending on who I bump into, I'm either the Instagram guy, YouTube guy, or the TikTok guy. Yeah. You know what I mean? Usually there's a difference in like age,
what's the demographic.
Yeah,
who calls you the Instagram guy? Who calls the YouTube guy?
So the Instagram guy is usually anybody, and again, this is just me categorizing it with a wide stroke, with a broad stroke. If you're like 20 and above, like I would say mid-20s and above, and I feel like you have a job. You know what I mean? You have a job.
That's high ARPU right there.
Like, that's high ARPU. Yeah. They look at me and they say, yo, you the Instagram guy. You the Instagram food guy. Again, broad stroke. I'm not saying that these people are not always on TikTok, but the audience that identify me as the TikTok food guy, they tend to be younger. Yeah. Younger, dyed color hair, you know what I mean? Picked up something from a vintage shop. Yeah. Wearing clothes that probably doesn't fit you properly.
That's
you know
the style.
What I mean?
Yeah, those big pants.
So they usually identify me as the TikTok guy. Now, when I'm at like Penn Station, I see like an older black gentleman who has a blue collar job. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then sounds like he's from the 80s. It's like, yo, what up, baby? Yo, I see your thing on YouTube. Yeah. Yo, you the YouTube guy. Yeah. So older demographic on YouTube, it seems. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because I don't think they had the wherewithal to download TikTok. Right. they don't use Instagram as a daily tool,
right?
But they watch YouTube.
Yeah.
So so that's kind of like how I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
YouTube tends to be a little older. Instagram, I would say millennial. TikTok, Gen Z.
That's fascinating. I think for each of those platforms, like, you know, they would think of their short form video offering as acquisitive, as like, if I'm YouTube, I'm going to use shorts to get that TikTok kid. And instead what happened was they sort of turned into moats where, you know, the YouTube guy may have at some point been forced to start watching TikTok because people are sending him TikToks, but because YouTube was able to get shorts out the door, he's like, all right, well, I get what I need from this. And I think you actually see that in the empirics where, you know, I think YouTube was like, if we launch shorts, we're gonna get some more female audience, and they didn't. Like shorts is heavily male. You can look at your analytics, that's what it'll show.
Another data point that I got was they say TikTok is the earliest, a week later is on Reels, and then a month later is on YouTube.
Yeah, I like those comments on TikTok where it's like, you know, Reels users finding out about the American Revolution. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like when we were starting Spotlight, that was like something that we looked at, myself and our, you know, community team was, all right, do we have the same trends as other platforms? Like at first it was no, and then it was good. It's like, all right, we're sort of on the same cycle. And then it was like, all right, we're like a month late. Oh, we're like 2 weeks late. Oh, all right, we're like same day. All right, now we have some of our own trends. But actually like tightening up that window, I think is a really good measure of platform health.
I mean, you mentioned that you've also worked at Snap.
Yeah.
You guys were being very strategic about creating original content or having more users to come on to provide UGC because for the longest time, Snap has been more of a communication tool.
For sure.
What were some of the challenges in addition to, you know, basically trying to make an entire community of kids that you essentially use Snapchat as an alternative to FaceTime?
Yeah.
To all of a sudden you need them to create content because there are certain type of market needs and financial needs that the app needed.
For sure.
Right. So like, how are you guys trying to bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the two biggest challenges are exactly as you described, which is that the core product value of Snapchat is close friendships. You go on Snapchat to talk to the people that you actually care about, and there's sort of a unique feature set that makes it easier and more fun to do that. And the second challenge is that sort of historically, the content offering on Snap was, as you described, built around original content and curated content. And, you know, I think, you know, Snapchat may get credit for like inventing the stories format, but I don't think it gets sufficient credit for really inventing mobile video. Like Snapchat came up at a time when, you know, Verizon was pouring money into Go90. And
I remember Go90.
Yeah. And like the conceit was like, we got to force people to like turn their phones on their sides. And Snapchat was really the first platform to say, we're going to make content that's vertical, that's optimized for you to watch on your phone. It's meant to be consumed.
That's 9:16, not 16:9.
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel that.
Exactly. And like shot with that in mind and developed and scripted with that in mind. And so, you know, even though there's not a ton of original programming on Snapchat anymore, I think like the team that developed that, you know, was pretty instrumental in laying a lot of the groundwork for what everybody watches all day now. And then likewise, you know, that sort of expanded to, okay, it's not just stuff that we're going to make, but also stuff that we're going to onboard, you know, the best storytellers and big partnerships with NBC. They have like the wherewithal to make custom content. And, you know, they were able to sort of grow engagement in so doing. But then what happened is that, you know, that goes from being best in class for what you can watch on your phone is like something that's just optimized for vertical to what's best in class for what you can watch on your phone is literally anything, right? Like if you were like, I want to watch Apocalypse Now, I could pull that up on my phone in 22 seconds, right? So you then have to sort of adapt to that reality where there has to be infinite choice. It has to be really well ranked. It has to be well distributed in sort of like a intuitive form factor as well. And so, you know, essentially what Snapchat has done is like kept one business healthy while growing the other one, which is this like vertical UGC, et cetera. While also I think really leaning on what it does well, which is this sort of social connotation, parasocial relationships. That's why stories are still huge on Snapchat sort of relative to other platforms is because people really like keeping up with the creators that they like. The other challenge, which you described, which is like, why do people go? It's for their friendships, not necessarily because they want to, you know, start a long viewing session. And so what we really did strategically was say, that's actually an advantage. So people are going to the camera to take snaps for their friends. We don't necessarily need them to like come with a short form video idea and use our camera to build it, but rather like give them topics, give them creative tools, make them want to use the camera. And then some of what they make, they'll want to post publicly on the story, or they'll want to submit to Spotlight. And there are so many people actually using the Snapchat camera every day that we can get supply from those people. And then the second was like to generate demand by servicing friendships, as opposed to, and this is actually diametric from what we did at TikTok. At TikTok, we had all this research that people didn't want more social media. They didn't want to have to start an account and ask people to follow them. Like, they were done with that. So our positioning was really, don't. It's entertainment. It's the same as Netflix. Open it, watch videos. You don't have to do anything but that. That is a totally valid way to interact with TikTok. People take that for granted now, but it was like pretty surprising in the market at the time when we made that strategic decision. At Snapchat, it was sort of the opposite. Like, hey, we're going to give you things to talk about with your friends. We're going to rank things based on how shareable they are. What we're trying to optimize for is the conversation that you have with your friend, as opposed to how deep we can get you into the feed.
Yeah. And I think that's why it was a challenge for us to try to onboard into Snapchat.
Tell me about your challenges.
I mean, one, there was just TikTok. The process was very simple. Make a video, put it on, get engagement, and follow through with that engagement. Repeat. Scalable.
Yeah.
Snap. Create content. Figure out how to navigate this complex, nuanced space that has all these internal language.
Yeah.
And it was so niche. And the pre-existing user base doesn't even want to see this content because they're going on there for, like you said, catching up with their friends. They're not trying to see, J. Key putting them onto an eatery.
Yeah.
Like, they have TikTok for that.
Yeah.
So trying to convert that audience and try to give them essentially utility and value when the value of the app itself has been established for such a long time.
Yeah.
That was a huge challenge and a learning curve.
Yeah. And I think also, to that first point, when I started at Snapchat, there was tons of different formats, right? We talked about it, originals and publisher stories and shows and creator shows and what have you. And that's not just daunting for a viewer, it's also daunting for you guys. And, I think the direction, what we worked on, what we spent years working on is like, can we deprecate some of these formats? Can we simplify it? It's just stories and video, but it's definitely through, it was
the way that I looked at it, it was kind of like going to a Dell computer store versus going to an Apple store.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Go to an Apple store, you get one option and a few colors.
Yeah.
You go to Dell, you get like 40 different laptop options.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yo, dog, I ain't got time for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And I think, short form video is the engine. It's how people discover new creators. It's really where the time spent comes from. And so you have to get that right for anything else to work.
So what are some content trends that you are observing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is what we're talking about, which is sort of this genericization of short form content. So one trend being content starting to look the same on all these different platforms and how those platforms are reacting. So whether that's an influence on more true UGC, trying to push scrappier creative tools, sort of one-touch posting, those sorts of things to mix in some true UGC, or going in the opposite direction. But I think that there's going to be a necessary backlash against everything sort of looking the same because the audiences themselves are a bit different. And I think we've sort of solved these video formats to a certain extent. So, on YouTube, people are like, Mr. Beast is this emblematic example of how to make successful videos. So I'm just going to try to make my videos look like that. I'm going to try to be as similar to that as possible. And there have been like 15, 25 channels that have done that well over the last 6 months. But ultimately, that's not good. We're taking away choice from consumers. And so I think the backlash against that is like certainly a content trend I'm watching. I think another one is sort of longer videos on short form and what the consumer reaction to that is going to be. So if you think about longer videos on short form, it makes sense from a platform perspective because they can test that it means longer sessions. And also the big part here is advertising and ad attribution. So you're a creator, you post to TikTok, you know that you're not getting rev share in the same way as YouTube. Now, TikTok has made a lot of efforts to pay people for different things that it thinks are important. Likewise on Instagram. And the reason that there's no rev shares, there's no directly attributable revenue in the same way as on YouTube. If you're selling an ad in your video, or if there's an ad break in your video, you have some claim, as opposed to ads that go in between videos. And so if you're one of these platforms and you have to figure out a logical way to reward creators, you have to figure out a way to attribute ad revenue to them. And the easiest way to do it is to put an ad in the video. So it's a pragmatic move in terms of creator rewards and in terms of the platforms themselves. But as a viewer, do I want more ads, right? Do I want ads in videos? And am I willing to sit through longer videos on a short form platform when I probably already have Netflix on in the background to begin with, right? I'm already watching longer videos.
Yeah.
And so that I think is going to be a really interesting transition to see.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking that first of all, programming short form video itself that could have a complete retention rate is already a challenge.
Yeah.
Now the expectation is for a user that is accustomed to just scrolling to potentially convince this user to not only sit through the first 30 seconds, but sit through 5 minutes without having the temptation of scrolling through.
Exactly.
Whew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yo, that's
and I think that's also why
that's gonna be a challenge.
Yeah. That's why, these other revenue streams, it's like gifts and subscriptions and commerce, and they have to diversify in that way because none of them are sure bets.
I know you went to Harvard and studied law, but you also worked at TikTok.
Yeah.
What do you think about the TikTok ban?
So I think there's a lot of different angles to the TikTok ban. I'll talk first about the legal angle because I think it's really interesting as sort of this snapshot of free speech in 2024, which is if you look at the body of First Amendment law as it exists in the US, you were talking about people getting on their soapboxes, people going on the street corner, people going to a park and delivering a speech or saying a position. That is a vanishingly small portion of the free speech activity that takes place in this country today. The huge majority of it takes place on social media, in particular on TikTok, if you think about the amount that's actually posted there and the number of actual people there are interacting there. And so it would be, an entirely unprecedented move for the Congress to just eviscerate that free speech function. I think also around the TikTok ban, to me, it strikes me as a real missed opportunity by the Congress and by the Biden administration to do comprehensive social media reform. If you think about the landscape of data privacy and social media regulation, it's a mess. And, we have GDPR, we have, more comprehensive rules and regulations in the EU. In the US, we have individual states, Illinois and Arkansas, passing bills around what social media platforms can and can't do. That is very firmly the role of the federal government to coordinate interstate commerce in that way. And so as opposed to a bill coming out of committee that's targeted specifically at TikTok, this should be comprehensive social media reform that can include guardrails on ownership potentially, but also on data collection and ad targeting and retargeting and how minors are treated on the platforms. And there's good models in other countries for this. And I think it's, it's a cheap out to just say all right, we're going to target TikTok and then we're going to take our hands off when the issue is much bigger than
I think there's going to be a lot of people out there that are creators, especially that watch our thing, that want to know what should I do?
Yeah. Yeah. I think even if you're not thinking about whether or not TikTok is going to exist in 6 months or a year, TikTok could say, well, they did, right? We're only paying for videos over a minute, right? Those are the only ones that are eligible for our creator payment program. Or they could say we're completely discounting subs, or it's going to be all sub based, right? So the power differential between the creators and the platforms is very significant. And I think if you're a creator, you need to be hedging anyway, right? So yeah, I think it's totally rational for creators to be follow me on Instagram, please follow me on YouTube. I think if TikTok goes away, there's going to be some people that are I love this community, I love these tools, I like posting this. Instagram is not a good surrogate for that. YouTube is not a good surrogate for that. And I think that will just disappear. But if you're a professional creator who's intent on staying a professional creator, you just got to, plant a lot of seeds.
What do you say to the people that think this is just really about regulatory capture?
Yeah. It's inarguable that the existing social media companies, the existing American platforms, have spent an enormous amount of time and money lobbying the government to take action against TikTok. That's purely for competitive reasons. Now, if I were to be generous to those platforms, and I will be, they can make this argument that it's not fair that TikTok can operate in the US when YouTube can't operate in China, when Instagram can't operate in China. So there's this profound competitive imbalance, and maybe it's the role of Congress to even out that imbalance. But it's certainly being done out of self-interest. There's no question about that.
So the other thing that I wanted to ask is 4 years ago, when Mr. Trump openly wanted to implement this.
I was there.
Yeah. So what was going on then, and how is it different this time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think, I was at TikTok during that process. I would say that it was largely marked by confusion because TikTok was already going through this CFIUS process, which is basically, a federal process where they can look at foreign investment and say, you need to divest. And this was specifically vis-a-vis the acquisition of Musical.ly. So, TikTok was already going through federal scrutiny around whether or not it could operate based on this Musical.ly acquisition. And then Trump just sort of put out a piece of paper, right? And so we were like, is this operative? Like, what does this mean that we exist or we don't exist? And it's because, he didn't go through Congress. He didn't use the sort of proper means. But there was internally a lot of confusion by us, like what's actually going to happen? Like, are we going to see if this CFIUS process is going to play out or not? And people forget that that went far. There was a negotiated deal between ByteDance and Oracle around TikTok moving over and becoming owned by Oracle. Ultimately, where that landed is that, Oracle handles data privacy and security in the US and makes sure that US user data is segregated and all that sort of thing. But it got all the way basically to the finish line. And then the deal was nixed by Chinese authorities. There's people sort of forget that, there's two players here. So even if the US demands and approves a deal, it still also has to be approved by the analogous authority in China.
CCP said no.
I'm not going to say the CCP, whatever trade authority it is in China. Yeah, exactly. So it got nixed on that side. And then the election happened and the can got kicked. But yeah, being at TikTok during the time of the Trump ban was wild. I mean, people forget, Kevin Mayer had come on as CEO a few months before. He then left, ostensibly because of the way that those deal negotiations went down and his own negotiated role therein. And what I was spending every day doing was just sitting in the FYP with the team, looking at the metrics, being like, what's the community saying? And then feeding those metrics up to V, who was our leader at the time. And then they would cut videos, speaking back to the community. But it was wild because there were certain deadlines where it was it's got to be down by August 10th or whatever. And we would see crazy traffic. We would see huge downloads because people would be like, this is the last day to get TikTok, or this is the last day to watch TikTok. So it was actually really good for the metrics that people thought it was going to get banned. Every week we'd see
basically pump faked.
Exactly.
And people got crazy engagement.
I really enjoyed one of the trends that happened during that time was people were making these videos where they would age themselves with gray hair, and they would be me selling cell phones from 2019 with TikTok on them in 2040. Oh, this is going to be a collector's item that already has the app on it. Because, it's the ban would be you got to take it down from the App Store or something like that. But you'd still have your videos. You'd still be able to watch what was getting posted.
So what is it different? How is it different this time?
Yeah, I think it's different this time because we don't actually see, there's been, Steven Mnuchin has come out and others have come out saying oh, we're going to make an attempt to buy it. But we haven't gotten to the point where there's a bona fide deal process happening. And also it's different because it's legislation. So, I think a lot of, sort of the activity and controversy around the Trump stuff was because it was so sloppy. So people were like, what is he using? What authority is this here? It's an executive order based on what? And so there was just a lot of confusion on enforceability and what was going on. And so here we have something that's come out of committee and passed through the House. That can be taken up by the Senate. They can do a new bill. They can reconcile it. They haven't yet done that. That could pass the Senate. Then there's a piece of legislation to be challenged in court, right? So I just can't imagine a scenario where 4 years from now, there isn't something called TikTok that's a short video app operating in the US. It is such an enormously valuable thing on its own. The incentives are overwhelming for either divestment of it as it exists, even in the most sort of hawkish scenario by the US, where there isn't a deal that gets done, or someone just like licenses the name, right? Like, you know, if you're looking to build a new platform, why would you build a platform that's called, you know, Super Videos when you could build a platform called TikTok?
Yo, so if I'm a content creator starting today, what should I do?
Yeah, I think the most important thing if you're trying to start up now is format. That it used to be the case that you could post a funny story, get a lot of distribution, people like your personality, you can sort of find your voice. I think it's much more difficult to do that now. And if you think about the way that the algo works, it's basically looking for content that's similar to content that succeeded and matching it with the audiences that like that content. And so if you're posting consistently and formatted, then you're going to give the algorithm time to figure out what you do and who is going to like it, and you're not throwing any curveballs. So I'll say like a good example of this is a TikTok account called Boy Room, where it's a New York City based comedian, and she goes into 20 and 30 something dudes' rooms in New York, and they're gross. And that account has blown up, and she's posted maybe 3 or 4 videos at this point. Right. Because the first video, very clear premise, it's funny, it pays off. The algorithm is able to say, okay, the people that like this are sort of dating adjacent, they're New York City based, what have you. It's really quickly able to locate audiences. And then the next video comes and it's the same, and it's the same, and it's the same. And so if you're trying to break through, I see a lot of people that are like, oh, I post, you know, my music and my workouts. It's tough to do that. Like if you really are looking to build an initial audience, saying, for example, oh, I watched every Best Picture winner and here's my review, that's going to be helpful because it's easily categorized and each video is the same and it can grow your audience from there.
Yeah. So essentially pretty much everybody that's having a fast growth rate right now. Yeah. Just repeating the same format over and over again until you build an audience.
Yes, I have a lot more confidence in people that come to me that say, I have a good idea for a TikTok account than people that come to me and say, I want to be a creator on TikTok, right? The idea shouldn't be you. It should be, it's me talking about this specific thing for this reason. It's this format. It's this setup and payoff. I think almost in the way that like there used to be all those Instagram accounts back in the day that were like that one J. Crew shirt, right? Where it's just like people posting pictures of seeing the same shirt, and that worked really well at that time because they were discreet and really clear, and the distribution was person to person. People were sharing them with one another. I actually think short form is sort of back like that again after we went through a sort of personality driven lifestyle influencer kind of phase. We're a little bit back to the TLDR. What does this account do? There are certain things that the platforms and the algorithm will identify as hallmarks of being premium. Right. And those things include consistency, the resolution of the video. You know, are you using a mic, right? Like the computer vision model knows that, right? And so all of those things, if you have a watermark, if you have a logo that's consistent, all of those things feed into the distribution. It can say, oh, videos that tend to be a little bit more premium, we want more premium content now, and we can break down, reverse engineer those elements. And what it looks like is somebody that has sound equipment. What it looks like is certain framing, you know, a certain aesthetic. And so if you make your videos look like that, the algorithm will recognize them as such.
Can we tap into that? Can we dive in there? We would purposely try to make stuff look more UGC.
Yeah.
So that audiences would feel like it's more genuine and more real and more authentic.
Yeah.
And ultimately gain a deeper trust. Are you saying that in some instances, if you are more premium, you do have a mic, you do have a watermark, or it's all framed in a certain format, that the algo will push it harder?
It depends what the algo is valuing at the time, right? But if you're a platform that's like, what we care about now is PGC, then what you're going to do is you're going to like get a bunch of people to label premium videos. What do the videos look like that we want more of? Then you're going to feed those into a model, and then the model is going to recognize videos that look like those videos.
I love that. And actually, can we extrapolate from that? I think that there's probably, from a platform perspective, the push towards PGC.
Yeah.
But then from a audience perspective,
Exactly.
there's probably a push towards more UGC.
I completely agree with this. I think there's very real tension. There's reasons that the platforms care about PGC. It's because it can be longer, because it's more advertiser friendly. You're more apt to insert an ad in a New York Times video because there's some implicit trust there. And because they're easier counterparties to work with, right? It's easier for them to negotiate a content deal with a big media company than it is 1,000 creators. So there's lots of reasons why the platforms would want more PGC. Also, I'm sure measured, right? I'm sure they see that there's a correct level of PGC in one's video diet that gets you to watch more content. But then certainly what I hear from audiences is that that's not necessarily, they don't necessarily want more of that. And in fact, you could look at short form as a reaction to that and the rise of creators as a reaction to that.
Can we actually share a testimony on how we're dealing with that in real time? Break it down.
Yeah, I mean, you could talk about this.
So we had this crazy call on Tuesday around why I thought our Righteous Eats Classic was stale. So at the time when we made it, it was very different than what was normally happening on the platform. It was PGC actually.
Yeah.
It was very much like, okay, everyone else is doing UGC, spectacle, let me do a review, let me do that. And then we basically took a lot of the chops that we made together at places like Group 9
Sure.
on the publisher side and applied that in a way that still felt UGC, but was actually PGC, right? Like we would have 3 essentials, right? It was a format where we had 3 essentials. We had a very specific like B-roll shot of things being made. We had a culture, like all these different things. And then basically what we ended up finding out from the performance of these videos after 3 years of doing it is that, people, like as an audience member and as people in our community, it didn't hit anymore.
Yeah.
Because it became too predictable.
Yeah.
So it became too PGC.
Yeah.
PGC friendly, which is also why we're probably getting more brand deals. We're probably getting hit up by more companies to want to work with us. But in terms of the actual engagement and user growth, it has stalled.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So on Tuesday, what we were thinking about, and this has been lurking, was, okay, well, how do we break it? How do we break it all?
Yeah.
How do we innovate? How do we go more towards UGC? And instantly, and of course, we already have been doing that.
Yeah.
And it's been working.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's this tension where people want more real, more real, more real, more real. And by nature, we still sneak in Sung using awesome cameras. We still sneak in the fact that people are mic'd up and you have great sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're not doing it in a very structured way.
That's right. I think that's the nature of like camera tools and CapCut and whatever, is that audiences now have pretty high minimum expectations for the sophistication of the video that they're going to see, because it's easy to like have a decent edit and have your sound pretty good and to like get your levels right. And so they want that. They don't want it to be so authentic that it gets in the way, but they still want it to feel like a person delivering it to them as opposed to something that was like optimized or generated too. And that's really tough, right? It's like if you go and do a video and don't mic people up, it's gonna flop. But if you do a video where people are mic'd up, but it looks like they're not, and you're just chatting, that's gonna do well. And that's like a tough line to walk for a creator.
So I have a question. Repeatable content. So in order for the format or for the channel to grow, we get that. But after you hit a certain point, the consumers, and in this case, the audience, like anything, you get tired of it.
Yeah.
Right. And then it becomes, is no longer the new kid on the block.
Right.
And they move on to the next. So for that particular creator where he, she, or they have created their whole entire identity providing one specific utility.
Yeah.
Now you're asked out because, they moved on to the next thing.
Yeah.
How do we prevent that?
Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest and most difficult question is like, it's, I think, possible and important to plant the seed of the next thing and the thing that you're doing. So it's like whether I'm expanding scope or mission or audience, I'm trying to add another cluster, move from this cluster, that cluster of audience. Like, I think that can be done, but it's also difficult. And it's true in sort of any creative profession where like, once you you become the painter that paints the big eyes. Nobody wants to see a landscape, right? And so it's difficult for artists to evolve from one form, one familiar format, one audience to another. And great careers are made for those that can go through those several phases, those several eras. And that's like really where you separate like the cream from the milk. The issue though for creators though is that like maybe your thing gets stale in 3 months.
Exactly.
Right? You know, you're not getting, it's not like if you were on a sitcom for 7 seasons, that's a great career. You don't have to be on another one.
Yeah, you're not like a basketball player that's going to retire as a Hall of Famer or a football player even. But yeah, with a creator, like your lifespan could literally be a month.
Yeah. And that's, I think, you know, it is important to own your audience. It is important to start to build like other touch points, events, you know, direct communication, whatever it is, so that those people will bear with you if you try to do something else, as opposed to, you know, essentializing it around a format, which I think is good to build audience, but starting to inject yourself in there in sort of phase 2, so they'll follow you from one thing to the other. It's the same point I was making sort of vis-a-vis earnings and value of an audience is like, it's obviously better to have 100,000 people that will follow you from one thing to the next than to have, you know, 1 million people that won't.
That principle validates why we do what we do every single day. And, you know, people say that creators are the new networks, right? New networks being the new businesses. And a lot, while you were going off on, you know, how creators could evolve and how platforms can evolve, they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
They're all the same thing in that, like, you are Amazon being Amazon is no different from Jakey being Jakey in that, yo, you get known for cooking content. How are you going to evolve from doing books online to AWS to eventually owning a studio? Right? To eventually owning and how do you do that in a way that makes sense every time you add a new feature set or acquire a new feature set, right? Like, and that's where it's all going.
Yeah,
right?
and I think, you know, if Amazon had started Prime Video in like 2009,
doesn't work.
It wouldn't have worked because, you know, they're not throwing off cash at that point. And like the reason that they can just keep taking shots around Prime Video and Freevee and whatever is because like they're taking half of your sale and they're taking the money from like you selling a t-shirt and then they're using it to like overpay talent so that they can get them on their shows. And if you're a creator, like you've got to have your AWS, you've got to have your Prime before you can try to have Prime Video.
Is Creators Lunch going to be our AWS?
It could be.
I hope so. Actually, what do you think Creators Lunch should be in our greater flavor thing?
And I want to add a little bit more context to that, because in the food content creator space, and this is again why I feel like it's crazy that the lifespan of the creator account, like as a creator, is so short that we have become the incumbents.
Yeah.
Now there are other creators coming up, taking cues from the type of content that we made and doing it faster.
Right.
So as a result, like we're now being the ones being chased, you know what I mean? And so having said that, we need to diversify.
Right.
And unfortunately, we don't have a singular format that we are repeating for us to continue this growth. We either have to go back into doing that, which also is going to have a learning curve, or we just continue on this other trajectory of consistently diversifying while keeping it to our roots within the food vertical. Kind of like The Rock always has to go back to WWE,
right?
But while he's doing all this other crazy shit. So like we're kind of split in between these two options right now. Where do you think we should go?
Yeah, I think, you know, it comes back to the comment I said about the importance of format, a repeatable format that provides value. And I think if you think about what Creators Lunch is, it's sort of an industry podcast, but it's also a platform for creators themselves. And so what's the value you're providing to creators? What's the value you're providing to the audience? And what's the value that you're providing to industry? And I think you can basically build a format that has acts that hit each of those. So if you're a creator and you're a growing audience because you're doing food reviews and that's what people like, and you're on the come up, you have to be thinking about, how do I start to build a greater relationship with those people that are watching my food reviews? But if you start to post personal stuff on your channel, it's not going to perform. You're going to dilute your metrics. So you guys can add a lot of value to creators by giving them a platform to tell their story on this podcast that they may not otherwise have, right? Come on Creators Lunch. You may have never told the story of how you left your corporate job, or how you experimented with a bunch of different things, or how you dropped out of school. And it fits in this format in a way it might not on their channel, but it allows them to start to build some of that personal affinity with their audience because they get to know you better. And this is the platform on which they can do it, as opposed to them doing like a one long form video or a one-off podcast episode. They can come with people that are experienced doing those interviews and getting stories out of people, and they can put that together. And then for the second act, it's like value to the audience themselves. So people are probably going to come and listen because they care about that creator, and because they're putting in a little bit more effort to go beyond the content that they're seeing on social. And so reward that, like a little bit behind the scenes, a little bit more intimate, a little bit more authentic, have them actually go into the content itself, which is why the audience is coming to the podcast. So like actually just having creators show up with a video and be like, tell us about making this. Why did you make this video? Why do you think it hit? Maybe it didn't hit, and why do you think that is? And actually, letting the audience go behind the curtain a little bit. So value for the creator in telling their story, value for the audience in going deeper into the content, and then value for the industry can be the third thing, right? What you're describing is creators are trying to figure out how they can have a longer shelf life, how they can turn themselves from making stuff into a sustainable career. That question exists not just for creators, but for the creator economy more broadly, right? We've seen this huge influx of VC funding, then it goes away, then it comes back. Creator startups launch and they fold, and then there's new ones. I think generally we have a lot of solutions in search of problems in the creator space. And so bringing a new person in every week that's making a different type of content, maybe has a different reason for making that content and is searching for different outcomes, and figuring out what's the business there, what's the why, like how can they become something greater than their content together. I think that will serve the people that come in, but also be really useful for a specific industry audience, which I would guess is who's listening to this.
I actually think the best episodes will actually the best episodes will have people where the why is clearly defined. Mm-hmm. And in that third act, we can help them define what, right? Because I think that is real value. That's where we can take the two constituencies that we live with and bring them together to hold hands, right? We can say, oh, these are content creators that are actively being creative and innovating and doing all these things. And they're evangelists. They are on a mission to do what they do. And then you have commerce and business and enterprise on the other side who are trying to connect with those people, right? Again, it's the Pharrell thing, art without business, right, is exploitation, right? Business without art is a big fucking waste of time, right? Yep. It's that. Yep. So I think that's where we can sort of bring those two things together.
I really like that. And I think, obviously you guys have a specific expertise, right? Entrepreneurial expertise, going through exits, starting companies, working with creatives. You have the expertise like front of camera, being a creator yourself, but also by virtue of having this platform, you're going to have people that come in that are spending every day thinking about their metrics, thinking about the next video they're going to make. And y'all will have talked to 100 different creators, and you can be like, oh, I was thinking about a book deal. Great. We talked to 5 people that just went through this, and we can tell you what they got and what you should be asking for and what that looks like. And so what it becomes is this real repository of creator business expertise that you guys hold, but will also acquire through doing more episodes.
So one last question is dilution of metrics. Yeah. You said this earlier. I'm going through that phase right now as the J. Keith Show content page. My page going from sharing, reposting content about food to me inserting some lifestyle vlog and then talking about the creator economy. And I think it pretty much prevented the growth of my channel. Mm-hmm. What do you think I should do if I want to grow?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to decide like how important growth is to that channel, right? Like you can have a channel that's Righteous Eats, and it's like what Righteous Eats does is Righteous Eats videos, and we want to grow this to everybody that would enjoy this format of video. And then you can have a channel that's not that structured, that's about you, that's vlogs, day in the life, your perspective on things. And the conceit of that channel can be you. And the audience might be smaller than it is for Righteous Eats videos, or it might be bigger, but you don't know. But you're going to what you should figure out is try to do the best version of the you channel. And then if it plateaus, then deepen the relationship with those people. And then I think ultimately how to scale you as a professional entity, as opposed to like a social media performance, is figuring out what are the things that you can help grow that you don't necessarily have to touch every day. You guys have talked about this, like you guys really pioneered a style of video. We see a lot of people doing that style of video now. You can set up sort of those Righteous Eats franchises where it's this style of video applied to travel, or applied to, you guys are doing this with college campuses or other people making videos of that style. And those are sort of branches of the tree that goes back to Righteous Eats, helps you scale without you having to actually make and edit and deliver every one of those videos. Just like the WWE benefits when The Rock does a movie, right? It makes the WWE more legitimate, and then he always comes home to roost. What I think the most successful editorial brands, which is really what Righteous Eats is, what they do is they stand for something, and then they create benefit of the doubt for consumers based on standing for something. So an example might be like The Ringer, right? The Ringer has a WWE show and a golf show and a football show and a basketball show. And if you know what the vibe is going to be, which you likely do, it's going to be jocular, there's going to be an expert, there's going to be a friend, you're going to get to know the personalities, it's going to be long form, it's going to be targeted at a certain demographic, as opposed to like going through the haystack for an NHL podcast. It's like, well, I probably know what I'm going to get from the Ringer one, and I'm going to opt in if I'm adding that podcast to what I'm listening to. And, they win not by having the only podcast, but by providing enough credibility such that the listener gives them the benefit of the doubt. Same thing with like Barstool, right? Barstool has lots of podcasts and lots of personality, but they sort of stand for something in terms of tone and audience, where those people, there's an implied curation there. And I think that Righteous Eats can be the same thing. You stand for a certain thing with your community, you profile a certain type of business, you care about the businesses. And so even if it's not, New York, even if it's not you can expand what that stands for into other places, maintain the purity of Righteous Eats, and you'll have an advantage because people impute some credibility to it being a Righteous Eats property. That's what you're trying to build.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, and I think the dance is being able to either invest and create or acquire those things that share that benefit of doubt.
Totally. I mean, it's like, to make this real, like corporate, like look at what Oracle does. Oracle has hundreds and hundreds of different pieces of software, enterprise software. You probably don't use any of them, but it's like, oh, if there's an upstart hotel booking software, Oracle knows like, oh, that's an Oracle company, and they'll just snap it up, right? They know the types of businesses that they are in, and even if somebody else starts one, they can recognize, oh, that's a business that Oracle should be in.
And to use Oracle, yes, but I actually think, again, to use the Amazon thing, it's like, as long as it has the core underlying principles and the benefit of doubt, I think the real challenge of becoming the top 3 or the top 2 is not only having that where you're like, oh, that's an obvious Oracle company, but also, oh shit, I didn't realize that that's an obvious Oracle company or an Amazon company, right? And again,
but you can't skip that step though. I think it's like
100%. But again, it's like books to CDs,
right,
to Whole Foods.
Exactly.
But the thing that to AWS, but the thing that's like, they're actually in the Minute Clinic, Minute Clinic City MD space now, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, what? Because it's an added benefit of Prime. Right?
Yeah, what we're in is the life membership business.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So
life business. They're going
which,
after
again,
the life business.
Exactly.
And if you think about the best creators, they should also be going after the life business. So when I look at The Rock, I think he's going after the life business. So you start with the WWE.
Thing with this girl, the Jerf.
Yeah, exactly.
Jerf, yeah, I drink my Jerf coffee. I wear my Jerf sweater. Yeah.
But the thing is, like, who would think that the WWE guy is going to do Moana? Is going to do Ballers?
Right.
Is going to do.
Well, that's the thing. Is like you think he's going to do
skincare,
like ball. Well, now he's doing shampoo, right?
Yeah.
But like,
and tequila.
I think it's so important though to go from books to CDs, because I think a lot of people try to go from books to web services because they're like, that's the bigger thing. So it's like, I'm a creator. The biggest economic outcome I can generate for myself is if I start a tequila.
Right.
But it's like, do you have a tequila audience? Do you have an edge in tequila? And the ones that are more successful are the ones that are like, I have an audience that has a need for something, for a hair oil or something like that. And that's how you win.
And that's why this is called Creator's Lunch. Because we tried to go from Jakey Cho to Righteous Seats, which was natural.
Yeah.
But then from Righteous Seats to Flavor Thing, which we thought would be natural and puts us in a big pond and a big dam.
It wasn't
and
flavorful at all.
It wasn't.
Do you think traditional media is washed?
I don't know that traditional media is over, but I think that basically everything is consolidated into two things, which are production and distribution. And I think that there's a lot of traditional media that's caught somewhere in between because they provide services that are commoditized. And you said this before, but technology is deflationary, right? So there's a lot of things that can be done by the individual that you used to need to go through a power broker to get. There's also more access to distribution. You can post on YouTube. Maybe one day you'll be able to post to Netflix, to be honest, but there's still some control there on the distribution side. So I think essentially what we see is that there used to be 5 sandboxes that we called traditional media, and those were gaming, studios, distribution, what have you, the distributors in a traditional sense. And that's just one thing. And I think what we have now is people go onto their phone or they go onto their TV and they decide what they want to watch. And this idea that they're deciding between Hulu and Netflix is, I think, spurious. They're deciding between Hulu and Netflix and YouTube and Live and all of those things they're considering equally. So that distinction between streaming and premium and social video, I don't think exists. We launched the TikTok TV app, something I worked on when I was there. That hasn't really taken hold, but I think it will eventually, right? So what you have is just a commoditization in terms of how content is presented to the audience, where there's no meaningful difference in the experience of choosing between short form, between streaming, between a TV show and a movie. So basically, what does that mean? It means that if you're traditional media, you have to be state of the art in terms of ranking and personalization. So people need to know that if they go to your platform, they are going to be recommended the thing that they want to watch. You can still lose this battle by not recommending the next episode of the thing that the person is watching or the thing that everyone is watching that's trending that just released. If you mess up the UX, you can still lose. So I don't want to, pay short shrift to all the work that goes into that. It's still very important. People have to know that if they open your app, they're going to see what they want to see. But then I think what happens is that we have a resurrection of the importance of programming, the importance of brand, the importance of promotion, and the importance of editorial. Those are things that I think have sort of fallen by the wayside with this rank everything technological revolution, is that what tech companies saw was they could get more and more engagement over time by investing in machine learning and making their ranking better and better and better. And then you hit some sort of frontier, and the implication of that is essentially that, programming doesn't matter. What we should just be doing is getting as much grist as possible and then running it through the algo. You see this in Netflix film strategy for a period of time where we just need to cover all of our bases and then recommend it. But I think when we get to a world where people are looking at the homepage of their connected TV and they're seeing TikTok and they're seeing YouTube and they're seeing Netflix and they're seeing Hulu and they're seeing Disney Plus, they're going to make a decision based on the vibe that they get from each of those and the mood that they're in. What do they want to see on their second screen in that moment? Maybe it's a continuation of a piece of content that they like, that they want to see the rest of, but it might be like, I'm in a Disney Plus mood versus a Hulu mood versus a Netflix mood. And in that case, curation does matter and brand does matter and promotion does matter. And you do actually have to stand for something if you want to stand apart on that sort of flat and even presentation. That's true, I think, of creators. I think it's true of brands. And I think it's ultimately going to be true of these tech companies that right now think of themselves basically as infrastructure.
But you would say that certain things are dying and certain things are growing and certain things are plateauing, right?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, if you think about old media being dead, a huge slice of what studios used to do was services. And now there's efficiencies in those services that are done better either by the users themselves or for free by the platforms. So if you think about what Sony, the value that Sony provides, a lot of it is in P&A, right? Where it's like, I want to do my rom-com with Sony because they're going to put up billboards. They're going to have magazine ads. They're going to run ads during the NBA playoffs. But if you ask anyone, why was Anyone But You a box office success? It's because Sydney Sweeney was posting to social media and they were being cute and playful and they had some chemistry and they were really engaged with the promotion of it themselves. It was all fueled through this sort of organic feeling virality much more so than any good tagline or traditional marketing campaign. And so if you're in that business, I think it's a tough position for you to be in.
Yeah. So, I mean, P&A, that's done more efficiently. Distribution can be done more efficiently. Yeah. Although there are experiences of going to I've always said that, I don't think that traditional media goes away.
Right.
I think it starts to service a different type of clientele and provide a different experience, right? Like I think movie theaters are going to be more expensive and are going to become more baller and more of an experience, right?
Well, that's exactly right. I think we've already seen this to some extent where, we had a Mission Impossible movie come out last year that was a disappointment because it got moved out of IMAX screens by Oppenheimer. They thought they were going to hold those IMAX screens for longer. The hype around Oppenheimer pushed them out, and that really affected the bottom line of that movie. So we're already seeing like the success or failure of installments in big franchises based on their capture of the 1,700 IMAX screens that exist. It's sort of like, if you were to go back to the 20s and if you wanted to be like a futurist in the 20s, you would have said, oh, theater is going to die because movies are going to take over. Why would I pay more money to see live performers when I could see the same thing on a silver screen? And the reality is that like certainly movies are a lot bigger than theater, but theater hasn't gone away because it's a differentiated experience. And so for film, we've seen that with, the premium large format screenings. I think, that probably continues over time.
We just released 2 videos. One has 2 million views and the other one has 200. Is shadow banning a real thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that when people say shadow banning, they're talking about a bunch of different phenomena at the same time. And people only have their individual experiences with the platform. So it's pretty natural for them to say, oh, I'm not getting distribution, I'm being targeted by the platform because you have just one datum. The reality is that isn't really how platforms operate at the individual level. So most of the time if I was at TikTok and I would have a creator partnerships manager, a growth strategist come to me and say, why isn't this person's content performing lately? It was randomness, because if you pick any particular point in time, some accounts are going to do better after that point in time and some accounts are going to do worse after that point in time. And that point in time might coincide with some platform announcement or a new program. So there was a lot of conspiracy theorists, there still are, that say like, oh, I opted into the TikTok creator payment program and then my views went down. That just isn't real. It's just that some people's views go down and that might coincidentally happen after they opted into a particular program. Now, what might happen is that you stop getting views for a variety of reasons. Those reasons might be moderation. So something that you've done or something that's been identified about your account that violates platform policies and distribution gets throttled because of that, maybe just to your followers, maybe to some subset of your followers that are above a certain age because of the qualities of your video that have been identified. It might also occur because there's someone who's making very similar content to you that's just performing a bit better. And this was very common where people would say, be making a series of TikToks about the 500 greatest albums of all time. And then somebody else starts to do it and they have more structured segments and their graphics are a little bit better. And the algorithm is just like, oh, we can get a little bit more engagement by moving your views over to this person. So that's not a human decision being made. It's just somebody taking your block.
So one could be, yes, terms of service, some sort of violation or moderation, right? Whether deemed by the system, the platform, or even by the community, right? Some of this flagging happens manually, right?
For sure.
Number 2 is just competition. Like someone might be better at providing what you used to provide.
Exactly.
So it is what it is. I guess in our specific example though, we literally have one video that has like 1.2 million, 2 million across all platforms.
Yeah.
We have on TikTok though, we have one video that has 1.2 million views next to the video that we posted right before that has 200 views.
Yeah.
And the 200 view video, I literally cannot share it in the app. So what do you think's going on?
Yeah. So all these platforms, they have thousands of human beings that are moderating those videos to see if they violate policies. And then they also have lots and lots of machine learning models that are looking at videos and trying to identify something about it that might mean that it shouldn't be distributed. So there'll be a model that's like, this person's holding a gun, therefore don't show it to anybody, right? That they don't want it to get to a human being because videos will have a few human views before they're human moderated. So they have these filters that are going to shut off distribution at various points based on what the model thinks is happening in the video. So for example, like it might be the case that TikTok's model thinks you're 13. And if you're 13, you're not allowed to get broad distribution. But there's a big computer vision model that's looked at people of lots of different ages, and it will just ascribe an age to you. So, or it might ascribe an age to you based on things on your account, and you'll just never get any distribution because the model thinks you're not eligible for distribution. So when you see that happen to videos, that's usually what happened.
I mean, and that breakdown is so helpful here because we literally have an eggplant emoji in the actual thumbnail. So, you know, eggplant thinking about like, so they might have, the computer and the model may have said eggplant, probably sexual content, this is how they get around it, right?
Let's talk about that. Does TikTok, or at least from the apps that you've worked for, do they control certain, do they get involved in the distribution of certain political messaging?
I think it's very different platform to platform. So, for example, I was at Snapchat, and the policy on Spotlight for a long time was just no political content. That's the most extreme, the easiest to enforce, although obviously there's complications around it. The downsides, of course, are like political discourse is good and healthy and important in a lot of ways, but you have to decide, do we have the infrastructure in place to monitor for misinformation, to identify bad actors, instigation, all those sorts of things. And for us, we were smaller at that time, and we had to build up that infrastructure and build up that policy before we started to allow some political speech, you know, first from, news organizations that have been validated, and then potentially more and more of the community thereafter. But those decisions are all made individually at the platform level. So it's like, you might say like, you know, I'm talking about climate change and I'm getting no views on TikTok, but a bunch of views on Reels, or vice versa. You know, that it might be because there's just slight differences in the policies around political speech on those platforms.
Yeah, and we don't have to go into the details. I mean, this has been well documented with X and Twitter.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the interesting thing, again, though, that Sam pointed out is we could have looked at that last video and said, oh, it was being flagged because, or shadow banned because it was talking about, you know, our support of Muslim eateries that we highlight. But I think that could have been done manually by somebody. I think it could have been flagged by somebody. I also think it could have just been the computer saying, okay, Muslim is in the title. There's an eggplant. This isn't related to what they normally do. We think something's going on. So until we figure it out, we're just going to stop the distribution.
Yeah. And I'll say two things. Like,
what if it was like, you know, like eggplant dish that's halal? You know what I mean? They could have registered that.
Totally.
Yeah.
But it was like jockeying Muslim. Like, I don't know what, like, I do think it's probably tech enabled though.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So two things. One, I'll say that there's human moderators making moderation decisions, and they don't make the right decision every time. So certainly, like, it's frustrating from the perspective of a creator to put time and effort into something and then it doesn't get distribution and you don't know why. It may literally be because a moderator doesn't understand a reference that you made, or an idiom, or just hit the wrong button. You know, that's the nature of human systems. The other is that I think like there is this tendency to anthropomorphize the model, where it's like exactly what you just said, like, oh, the video had these words in it and they decided this. But the reality of how this usually works is that it gives the model a huge set of violative videos, and then it says, find videos like that. And no one knows what the model is looking for, actually. That's the nature of machine learning, is that you just sort of give it outcomes that you want to achieve, but you don't actually know the characteristics that it's looking for, just that it's achieving that outcome. So it may have been the font, right? It may be like, oh, we noticed a correlation between the use of a particular font and videos that are violative. And that correlation might be specious, but the model just will notice that and extrapolate based on that.
Yeah. And that's been around for YouTube, right? Like, YouTube has all this tech, and this was 15 years ago. I remember seeing all the technology around like how they block porn, right?
Yeah.
And they don't know the difference between that and like you going swimming. Right. And then they're gonna be like, and then so
they do now, but
15
years ago,
15 years ago, they didn't. So it's going to be like, in 15 years, will that video get flagged? I don't know. Anyway, this has been really fun.
Yeah, it's been great. Yeah, thank you so much for pulling up.
Will you come back? Will you come back?
I would love to come back.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
was really good. Yeah, I had a lot of fun, guys.
Yeah, let's do it again.